Motor function. So a lot of this is already covered in the spinal anatomy section, so I'm not going to go super deep into this. Just going to touch on the things that potentially could get asked. So upper motor neuron versus lower motor neurons. Upper motor neurons are the cerebral cortex and the brainstem, and they're the ones that control the lower motor neurons. So you could say this is the central nervous system. Lower motor neurons are kind of spinal cord, brainstem, and they directly go and they innervate the different muscles. Little correction I'm going to make here. Spinal cord, spinal nerves, when the nerves come out of the spinal cord, that's when we officially consider them more the lower motor neurons. The corticospinal tract is one of our motor tracts that is in charge of voluntary movement. The rubrospinal tract is fine motor control. Vestibulospinal tract is for balance and posture. And the extrapyramidal system is involuntary movement control. Think like a lot of our postural type muscles. The motor unit and neuromuscular junction, as well as the muscle spindle and Golgi tendon organ, we will come back to that. We group it with the skeletal muscle material because it fits really nicely in there, and I don't want to repeat it more than once. Then the basal ganglia and the cerebellum, having to do with motor coordination. Again, that is all found in the spinal anatomy lecture videos. I'm going to reiterate here, if you're going to spend a lot of time studying any of these subjects, study a lot of time with spinal anatomy. The vast 22% of your overall grade comes from spinal anatomy, and there's so much material in there, and there's so much overlap from the spinal anatomy section in these other sections that really, as long as you really have that material locked down, you're going to do your likelihood of doing much better on boards goes up significantly. All right, so really master the spinal anatomy material. Reflexes. When we talk about reflexes, usually we'll have one or two questions about mentioning reflexes or how they work. These are automatic rapid responses to stimuli that occur without conscious thought. So think about like all of our deep tendon reflexes, the patellar, the Achilles, the brachial, the ones that we check on every single patient. Those are examples of some of our reflexes. Now we have monosynaptic and polysynaptic reflexes. When we talk about these, we refer to how many synapses does it take for the reflex to go from sensation to motor. So a reflex arc involving, if it's only one synapse, so the sensory or the afferent neuron connects directly to the motor or the efferent neuron, that is a monosynaptic reflex. A good example of this is the stretch reflex, also known as the myotatic reflex. This is our knee-jerk reflex, our patellar tendon, deep tendon reflex that we test on patients. This is the prime example of our monosynaptic reflex. With the reflex, we have the mechanism, or what's called the reflex arc. So we have a stimulus, in this case the tap on the patellar tendon, causes the stretching of the quadriceps muscles. The muscle spindle that is inside of the muscle, they're the ones they detect stretch, and they're going to send a signal along a specific neuron that is a type 1A sensory neuron. And that sends the impulse to the spinal cord. All of our sensory components enters in through the dorsal root ganglia. And this type 1A sensory fiber is going to directly synapse with the alpha motor neuron, specifically the alpha motor neuron for the quadriceps. The alpha motor neuron gets stimulated and it sends a signal, and that impulse causes the quadriceps muscle to contract. This is a protective type mechanism. Okay, the quadricep muscle, when we strike the patellar tendon, we stretch the muscle really, really quickly. So think of it almost like you're taking the muscle and you're pulling it really suddenly. So the body's response is to contract the muscle to prevent it from being pulled and potentially injured or torn. At the same time that the quadriceps muscle is going to contract, we get what's called reciprocal inhibition. Because the quadriceps needs to contract, the antagonist muscle group, so the muscle that would be going against or doing the opposite movement of the muscle we want to contract, we need to inhibit that muscle to make sure that it doesn't also accidentally contract. This is called reciprocal inhibition. So we get a little branch off of that type 1A sensory fiber. It connects with an interneuron. The interneuron is going to release an inhibitory signal onto the alpha motor neuron of the antagonist muscle, in this case, the hamstrings muscle. And that prevents the hamstrings from contracting to allow for a nice, smooth movement. Most common examples are the patellar reflex, testing our L2 to L4 nerve roots, and also the Achilles or the ankle jerk reflex, testing our S1, S2 nerve roots. So we've seen this one a lot, but definitely a lot more going on there than what initially meets the eye. Now, polysynaptic reflexes, the most common one is known as the withdrawal reflex. When we talk about polysynaptic, this means we have interneurons. We have a bunch of neurons in between, so it's connecting to a whole bunch of stuff on the inside, and so it's polysynaptic. So it involves multiple synapses between sensory, interneurons, as well as motor neurons. This is slower than the monosynaptic because we have more synapses and more stuff involved. It's going to take longer for the whole message to get through and to do what we need to do. Not by much, but it's going to be a little slower. So the withdrawal reflex, this is one of the most common ones, like stepping on a nail or stepping on a Lego, stepping on something sharp. That is a stimulus. We step on some type of sharp object. This is also like if we were to touch a hot object, that you touch the hot stove or something like that. Pain-sensitive sensory neurons, our nociceptors, send a signal to the spinal cord through what are known as A delta fibers. Don't worry too much about that, but know that it gets sent through nociceptors. That sensory part enters through the dorsal root, and then it branches out and it connects to two sides of the muscle, and it also crosses the spinal cord. And that's typically one of the questions that they like to ask. Crosses the spinal cord is one of the things that they can pop up in there when they're talking about polysynaptic reflexes. Specifically the withdrawal reflex. So with this, on the same side that we have the painful stimuli, we want to pull away from the painful stimuli, so our flexor muscles are activated. And then the opposite side, we need to try and catch ourselves or prevent ourselves from getting any more harm, so the opposite side extends. So in the case of stepping on something, the foot that we stepped on is going to flex, retract away from the painful stimulus. And then the opposite side, the extensors are going to activate to catch us, to prevent us from falling. So they're going to compensate for the other side. And we actually do also see this with somebody getting burned. If you notice, if you ever see somebody touch something hot, when they draw their hand away, they'll touch them, they'll draw their hand away, and their other hand instinctively actually shoots out, kind of protecting away from something. So it's kind of a cool little tidbit. Okay, we'll go ahead and end this one here, and then we'll talk in the next one about sensory function. Again, we do see quite a bit of this is covered in the spinal anatomy section, so that it kind of helps us a little bit not have to dive as deep into this material.